Ian, you and I could stand here all day talking about safety. Some people find it boring. I don't. I think it's critical. I genuinely believe that it's critical. But without trying to simplify it too much, can you tell people watching now, 4 or 5 really common mistakes that people make behind the wheel that they probably don't even realise they're making?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to look at is no one intentionally wakes up and says, today's a great day to die.
Sure.
Today's a great day to crash the car. Let's have the airbags go off. I mean, when we look at it, probably the number one would be tailgating.
Yep.
Now, a lot of people don't believe they're tailgating, yet 30% of the crashes we see on Australian roads are people travelling too close. Right. Because, as you know, it takes a certain amount of time to stop a vehicle, given reaction time and so forth.
Yep.
So that's number one. Number two would have to be seating position in the car.
Sure.
We all come in different shapes and sizes, and modern vehicles have got an array of adjustment, even steering wheels, up, down, in, out. Yet a lot of people think it's a one-size-fits-all, and that can impact on driver fatigue because we've got the wrong posture.
Yep.
There's the problem. That then relates to the big one that is my pet hate, is rear view mirrors. Now, as we know with trucks, they've got mirrors, they've got signs on the back, if you can't see me, I can't see you. Yet so many people have their mirrors adjusted so they can see the side of the car.
Ah, yes.
That shows you the impact when the person's got you.
Yeah.
So the further off the vehicle, you're actually getting rid of what's commonly called the blind spot. So that's 3. When you look at number 4, it's people actually over-braking at the end of the stop. Right. As we know, at any speed, your maximum speed is at the beginning, and when you're stationary, you're stationary. So you need all of your braking here and not at the end. Yep. And yet people, they tend to over-brake to the end, and all the passengers nod their heads with approval. Right. And the final one, I guess you could sit back and say, nobody owns the road. We have to share the roads with everyone else.
There is a bit of an entitlement that's crept into the way we drive, especially in the big cities, isn't there?
Well, people think it's self-entitlement. I own the car, I own that piece of road. I mean, people are allowed to push in, supposedly with safety, but what we've got to look at is it's all about your attitude.
Yep.
And you're going to get to your destination whether you like it or not. Sometimes things are outside of your control. So chill out, you will get there, and drive to the conditions. That's the big one.
On that one, I've got a bunch of questions for you, but on that one there, there's a blanket message out there that if you speed, it's dangerous, it kills people. Now, to an extent, there's an element of that I think everybody would agree with. However, we were speaking off camera before that if you're on a country road that's signposted at 100 kilometres an hour, if your speedo says 100, in your mind, behind the wheel, you're not speeding. However, if you're on that road at midnight, if it's poorly surfaced or there's sections of gravel, if there's no street lights, if it's raining, I would argue you shouldn't be doing anywhere near 100. So you might not be speeding if you're doing 100, but you shouldn't be doing anywhere near 100 to do exactly what you just said, which is drive to the conditions.
Look, I love the way you put that, Trent, because so many people will say, if it's an 80k zone, I'm doing 80, I'm not speeding.
Sure.
You are. You're speeding at 80 kilometres an hour. And when you look at that, you're travelling around about 23 metres every 1 second.
That's a lot.
So people have to understand that speed is to the conditions. And that also comes back to your own inner health, your well-being, your awareness. A lot of people tragically engage D for dream on the automatic, drive down the highway and have that highway hypnosis saying, how did I get here? I can't remember part of the journey. And that really comes back to training.
Yeah.
We've got to have people better trained, more aware, and a lot more aware of the latest vehicle technologies that the manufacturers are providing.
On that subject, a lot of people ask us this at Drive, that with modern vehicles as technologically advanced as they are, the majority of people driving automatics, is that part of the problem that we're not as aware behind the wheel because the car is doing more for us? People say a driver's getting worse because the cars are getting better.
I think drivers are just, they've got so much going on in their life. They've got personal issues, health issues, wealth issues. Yeah. We know that the economy's changing and so forth. So a lot of drivers use drive time as think time. Think about everything else. In other words, they externalise their thoughts outside the vehicle itself.
Sure. Yep.
So while the manufacturers are doing a fabulous job giving us all this wonderful safety, active safety and so forth, what about the driver? I think also vehicle manufacturers need to take a level of responsibility too, to sort of say, maybe do more with their customers.
To educate.
In other words, educate them about the advanced technologies, how it functions and all those sort of things there. So then we're going to have better, safer drivers on our roads. And I think at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants.
Is it too easy to get a license in Australia? I've got relatives overseas, and if you look at countries like Germany or Italy or even the United States, I've got friends who live in the US, it's seemingly more difficult in terms of steps and process to get your license in a range of countries around the world in Australia. I've said for years, and I kind of just say it as a throwaway comment without thinking about it, but I've said that young people should have to come to someone like you in the process of getting their license to do the safety training before they're let loose on the road. Do you think there's merit in government getting behind training along those lines, and is it a bit too easy to get your license at the moment?
The sad reality is that governments are going to say, if you do a skills-based driving program, it's going to make you overconfident. I mean, seriously, when you look at Qantas's safety record, pilot training, to get a pilot's license on a small aircraft, you can't go straight to a jet.
No.
You've got to go through a process. I think what governments need to look at is the motorcycle training, which is fantastic.
Yep.
You know, you've got an 8-hour
Yeah,
program.
I've done my motorcycle license.
8 hours for learner, 8 hours to move off it through there.
Yep.
What do we do for the driving test? 40 minutes drive around the block, the practical test I'm talking about. It has nothing to do with the real world. And governments have to take responsibility, because road carnage on our roads federally is about a $24 billion problem per annum.
You mentioned skills training. I think it's really important that we explain, because I understand what it is that I'm coming to learn if I do a course with you, as I think I did years ago. But there's a big difference between what you would colloquially refer to as an advanced driver, where you go to a racetrack, drive like a maniac, push your car in a safe environment off the street, and a skills training course, which is what we're talking about, which is what you do. There's a big difference, right?
Well, look, I use the term driver development.
Yep.
And if you use the term defensive, a lot of people get offensive when you use the word defensive, which is crazy.
Yep.
But governments have to understand that every day there are good people out there driving and they're not crashing. Now, it's the minority people, the ratbags out there, that think the roads are racetracks, illegal street racing. We see crashes all the time happening.
Yep.
There are some people that are going to break the rules. I mean, when you go for your driving test, what part of the stop sign don't you understand? I mean, stop, 3 seconds, look left and right, and when it's safe to do so, proceed. But most people don't even understand the rules. So we're in the business of driver development, changing attitudes, behaviour, which is based on choice.
Right. Are you finding that in a corporate sense, because you've done everything in the 40 years that you mentioned, from training, a person to an organisation, are you finding in a corporate sense that businesses are taking responsibility and saying, we want to put safer drivers out on the road?
Well, look, with any employer, they've got a duty of care under workplace health and safety. Just giving somebody the keys to their new company vehicle and putting them out on the road as a rep or whatever, they're out there in a very dangerous environment, as we know. A lot of responsible companies are starting to look at that. We run on-site workshops for companies to promote how you can mitigate risk. You're never going to eliminate it, but how you can mitigate it. And that comes back to actually opening a person's mind about the choices that they make on a daily basis. So cars don't crash, people do. 95% of crashes are related to human error.
I find this really intriguing. Whenever people who don't know what I do for work find out what I do for work, invariably it's that, what's the best car you've ever driven? How fast have you driven? How fast have you driven on a public road? Because they know we go to Germany and drive on autobahns and things like that. And for me, there's plenty of cars now, this might sound stupid, but there's plenty of cars that do over 300 kilometres an hour, ultimately, right? Which is useless to us on the road in Australia, as we know. I tend to say to people, what I find truly mind-boggling, the more technology that I test in new cars, is their braking ability, the way the steering works, the way the suspension works, the balance of it when it's doing things that we will be showing here today, swerve and avoid, really hard braking manoeuvres. If you got in a car from the 1980s and stood on the brakes, it felt like it was going to somersault over itself.
100%.
A new car just comes to a stop if you really stand on the brakes. So I think there's an interesting story to be told that beyond how fast a car is from 0 to 100 or what it can do around a Nürburgring lap time is all the technology that's going into making it safer. That's pretty interesting as well, right?
Well, it is. And if we look closer to home at Bathurst, I mean, Bathurst is a public road for 99% of the time.
That's true.
And when we're fortunate enough to go there, whether it be the Bathurst 12-hour, 24, or the Bathurst 1000, I mean, you've got to look at safety in motorsport. You've got, cars doing 300 kilometres an hour that you alluded to on a public road. But they're all going in the one direction. They've all got two-way communication. We've got flag marshals.
Yes.
Because anyone who's driven at Bathurst on a public road, you can't see what's around the corner.
You can't.
And you look
That's
at
at 60 kilometres an hour.
That's
you can't
exactly
see- yeah.
at the legal speed
Yeah,
limit.
that's right.
So it comes back to that message of speed. You know, are you speeding or not? Well, you're speeding all the time. People need to take responsibility, look in the mirror and say, am I really up to speed with the technology that the vehicle manufacturers are passing on? And the answer is definitely no.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Now, one of the things that I've advocated for a long time, beyond driver training, which requires you to go to a third party and say, teach me and provide me with the skill set, is your own understanding of what it is that you're doing behind the wheel. Now, that extends to your daily drive to work. It extends to if you're driving off-road, for argument's sake, because that's a whole other skill set, right, as you know. And then, of course, things like towing. I had an alarming conversation a few years ago with a representative from one of the big caravan manufacturers. And they said to me that something around 90% of their customers, the first time they've towed anything, and I tell people this all the time, can't believe I'm saying it still, the first time they've towed anything is when they tow their new caravan out of the dealership. Now that to me is staggering, because if I've got a near 3-ton four-wheel drive and a near 3-ton caravan, and I just spear off down the road with 6 tons combined mass, having no idea what I'm doing, I would suspect that's incredibly unsafe, because it brings into play weight where the weight is, braking, braking distances, all of those other things. I've always said I think we need a whole separate training course and skill set for people who are going to be towing big trailers.
Well, you've only got to look at the trucking industry, because you've touched on a really can of worms. To process through the trucking business, whether you're driving a fixed or a rigid, semi-rigid, 22-wheeler, 34-wheeler, it's only the size. You've got to have a level of what they call competency. Forget the word skill. I prefer to say skill, because without skill you can very quickly be killed. So the trucking industry, generally, they take a lot of responsibility the way it's administered and marshalled, but yet, as you said, someone can go and buy a big caravan, they've never driven it, and a good example is also at the local boat ramp. Go there on a Saturday and watch people trying to reverse. They have no idea until they've actually done it. And we're putting people on the road, and again, governments need to take responsibility for the massive road toll and the conditions that are out there. They're not doing anything about changing it. So it's time for change.
We talk a lot about exactly what you said there, which is the goose at the boat ramp trying to reverse their trailer down, or the first timer at the caravan park that can't manoeuvre their caravan. That's kind of the funny stuff, right? Like we all talk about that, and we all go, look at this person, they don't know what they're doing. But the reality is that is symbolic of a bigger issue, which is a serious safety issue when you're out on the road, because chances are, if you don't understand what the trailer's doing behind you when you're reversing it, you're not going to understand what it's doing behind you when you need to brake in an emergency when you're going forward.
Well, that's right. I mean, the person heading up, say, towards Queensland from Sydney, you know, Pacific Highway, lovely motorway, they're allowed to tow at 100 kilometres an hour. But what if they've got to stop? The first time they've done it is when they've actually done it, and they have no idea all of that mass that's pushing it forward. It requires a huge amount of space. So it comes back to that comment that I made before about driver awareness. You've got to open a person's mind. The day you think you know it all, you've become a know-all. And that's it. Motor cars, as we said, don't discriminate, whether it's caravan on the back or a boat. People need to take responsibility for their actions. So a thinking driver is a surviving driver.
I like that. To wrap it up, I'd love you to give us just a quick insight on what you'd like to see from governments as we move forward. Because it's one thing for us to say it, but an expert like you who spent their life doing what you're doing, I think it's got a lot more weight to it. And one thing you'd like to see from us as individuals.
Well, governments, for a start, in New South Wales, they developed the Safer Driver course for learners. I was privileged to sit on the steering committee to assist government with information. That is a phenomenal product for young people, inexperienced, because we know young people are overrepresented in crashes. So that program is there. It's not mandatory. It's discretionary. And for a minimal amount of money, the government offset it. They should make it as a standard part of road safety.
Let's
to say
make it mandatory.
Every person must do the Young Safer Drivers course. Yes, you save 20 hours, but the product at the end is a much more aware driver, because mum and dad have taught them to drive, invariably. A few last minute learner driving lessons, and then you drive around the block and you get the licence. So that's probably, I think that's probably the big thing that governments could do. And that could happen in other states as well. I mean, As you know, I live in Queensland, and
We won't hold that against you.
No, I know, but they're all roundabout races up there. See, it's a different way of life. It's
So we've solved the government problem. That's solved. Let's put that to one side. Let's put better skilled drivers on the road. And look, I would imagine as individuals, it's as simple as me ringing someone like you in my home state who does what you do, a reputable driver trainer, and say, I want you to improve my skill set.
Well, that's right, and you never stop learning.
Sure.
As I said, the day you think you know it all, you know all. But again, companies, government departments, a lot of them are doing the right thing by sending their people to programs like we run, and that's a level of responsibility. You've got to take responsibility for your own actions, and you never stop learning.
So tell me what we've got here, mate. You've put it in D for dream, as we said, but we're not going to sleep. We're actually going to pay attention to what we're doing here. And this looks to me like a slalom that you would set up, right?
Well, all motor manufacturers around the world like to look at vehicle dynamics. In other words, a simple term, vehicle balance.
Yep.
As we know, with lateral movement in a vehicle, that's commonly called body roll. Virtually none in this vehicle. And then we've got the forward and aft pitch of the vehicle controlled by braking or acceleration. So what we're really looking for here is to try and get some dynamic response with regards to throttle, which is to do with the balance of the car. So I'm going to go through fairly slowly to start with, but as I look through here, I'm looking for the gap, not at the product itself, not the hat.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So a bit of acceleration there.
So you're doing just under 40 k's an hour, give or take.
And you can feel every time I touch the accelerator,
Yep.
this Volvo's got beautiful response.
Yes.
And it's actually making the car sit very flat. Now, at that speed, everything is fairly normal.
Yes.
So when we increase speed, we start increasing the load on the vehicle itself. In other words, the vehicle dynamics.
Yep.
So
Now I noticed then too, you're touching the accelerator as we're in the middle of the curve, just to sort of get it to the speed that you want it to be at.
exactly. But what I'll do now, I'll just change things up a little bit.
Yep.
I'll accelerate around the cone.
Oh yeah, I can feel. Oh yeah, I can feel that. Yes. That's changed the language of what the car's doing completely.
Now
hasn't it?
I'm doing the same speed.
Isn't that interesting?
And yet, as a passenger, you could feel that.
I'm getting moved around a lot more.
Correct, because I'm creating lateral force on the car because I'm accelerating at the wrong time.
Right.
Most people don't have a connection between the brain and the right foot. So what we'll do is we'll just step the speed just a little bit more.
Yep.
So I'm accelerating across the cone.
Yeah, you can feel straight away it's getting a lot more physical in what the car's doing. You can
Now you could feel
yeah.
there was a little intervention there of what's called stability control.
Right, okay.
Now I can see that you are smiling then, so that's a good sign.
Smiling because we made it safely, because we're in safe hands.
But the intervention of the electronics then was quite interesting because the car started to get a little bit more, let's say, agitated, which was caused by driver inputs.
Yes.
But yet the electronics said, gee, hang on a minute, I don't like what's happening. Allow me to back off the power. And it actually applied the braking electronically.
Yep.
So the car's actually smarter than the driver.
Smarter than the driver. So Ian, you're going to show us a couple of emergency stops now. And I think this is really important because a lot of people think 40 kilometres an hour is too slow. There's a reason that we have 40k an hour in a school zone, right? And it's because kids are unpredictable. They can just run out onto the road.
Young children, has been proven, have got no spatial awareness.
Right.
They've got no peripherals or anything like that. The ball runs on the road, they target the ball, they race out. So let's look at 40 kilometres an hour in a school zone.
Yep.
And I'm going to stop at the first set of cones. I'll put the brakes on. And I'm going to do a full ABS stop. So the speed in this lovely car is going to come up nicely. 37, 38, 30, there's 40 kilometres an hour.
Yep.
Okay, right on 40 Ks. And as I approach through here,
Oh, seatbelts came on time.
wow, you could feel that pre-tension in the seatbelt.
Yeah.
Again, another safety device built into this vehicle, holding us in the seat. Now, we pulled up incredibly short.
That's just under a car length.
Yeah.
Basically.
So that goes to show you that, modern day braking, full ABS, in other words, if a person panicked, they weren't paying attention, that's how they'd brake.
Yep.
Now, a lot of people say, oh, I'd never brake like that. And I say, well, try to stay attentive for 110% of the time. Most drivers
You
find
never
that
brake
difficult.
like that until you need to, right?
Until you need to. And you need to know what's underneath you, what technology.
Sure.
So the activation of this Volvo anti-lock braking is it's quite harsh, but it's designed to stop the car. And as you said, it stopped incredibly well. So let's just up the speed. We'll go from 40 to 80. Now, there are some people that have an attitude, oh, look, I'm coming home from work, you know, oh, it's a 40k zone, it's okay to do 60 or 70 or even 80. We've seen that recorded.
Yep.
It's absolutely dangerous.
Right.
We've got to get our head around it to think speed zones are there for a reason. So,
Yep.
okay, we bring the speed up. There's 80k.
Yep. Ooh, right.
Now,
So-
that was stopping in 26 metres because the boys have paced that out.
Yep.
Now, hazard lights are flashing, which is another safety feature here, warning people behind, hey, I've just done an emergency stop, and speed is proportional to distance. So, okay, let's take it further and let's go to the legal speed limit and
Yep.
try one at 100 kilometres per hour.
So anecdotally, for people who've got no idea what we're talking about here, doubling the speed has more than doubled the braking distance there, right? So going from 40 to 80 kilometres an hour and really slamming the brakes on, it's more than doubled the distance that you needed to pull up.
It's well and truly more because
Yeah.
of that space through there.
Yeah.
We stopped in, as you said, just over a car length,
Yeah.
and that was close to 4 car
Yeah,
lengths.
4 car lengths, exactly.
So if we get the speed even faster, which we're going to do, it has to be proportional. We're going to take the stopping distance a lot further. And that's why 30% of accidents on our roads are people running up the back of people
Yeah.
because they don't have enough space to stop in. And people say, oh, but if I leave a gap, someone will push in. We don't own the road.
And we don't own the road. And to that point as well, just before you do the 100-kilometre one, this is a brand new car on high quality tyres at the right tyre pressure with everything up to date, brakes serviced, all that sort of stuff. If you're driving a 10-year-old car and your tyres are a little bit worn or your brakes aren't brand new, it goes even further, right?
Well, that's right. And people have to remember tyres are the last point of contact
Yeah.
between us and the road. You're responsible for the air pressure in the tyres
Sure.
because no matter how good the tyre is, lack of air pressure is not a good look.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get our speed up. Car exceeds very nicely. Wow, beautiful. Okay, there we are. Verification with you.
Yep, 100 k's an hour.
100k, right at the first cone.
Yep. Wow.
And as you can see now, we've travelled a lot. Forget driver reaction
Yeah.
time. That was being proactive. That was physical stopping distance. This lovely new Volvo pulls up brilliantly, but we can see the faster we go, the more space we need.
Absolutely, a lot more.